And it is our news just in. 4 more SANDF soldiers have been killed in ongoing fighting in the eastern parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is, of course, over and above the 9 soldiers who we're told had died at the weekend, bringing to 13 the death toll, at least from the SANDF. Let's make sense of this now. SABC News International Desk Editor Sophie Mokoena is with us here in studio. Great to see you as always, albeit under these circumstances. No doubt the latest development is going to add pressure on the SANDF to, at the very least, explain how they're hoping to bring a close, or at least close the gap, or let me rephrase that, how they're going to at least support some of the soldiers who are on the ground in the DRC.
Well, I think it's sad news that now we're adding 4 more soldiers. 1 died at the hospital after the soldier got injured during that standoff. But the other 3, it's fresh fighting. And we know even this morning, as you can see, we have those visuals coming from Goma, where on Friday and Saturday, that heavy fighting, the Friday fighting where we lost soldiers. And after that fighting, some were taken to hospitals where they got injured. But the South African National Defence Force putting a fight trying to repel the M23 rebels. They were able to do that, but there were casualties on both sides. At some point in time, then a white flag was hoisted. That white flag that was hoisted by the South African National Defence Force at that military base, it was because the 2 groups had agreed to cease fire temporarily so that M23 rebel can be able to take their soldiers, the fallen soldiers and those who were injured, so that they can be taken to the hospital. The South African Defence Force, on the other hand, also trying to communicate and be able to indicate the latest in terms of what was happening. Therefore, that white flag didn't mean South African National Defence Force surrendering or the troops surrendering, but in a war zone, there are moments where you agree that, okay, let's cease fire for an hour and you can take your injured soldiers, we can take our injured soldiers, take them to hospitals for treatment or the next medical center. And therefore that was meant for that. But fighting is continuing in Goma, a majority of Goma taken by M23 rebels. The DRC forces is fighting back. We know that the South African troops are now at their military base. I think a decision, that's my suspicion, was taken that the South African forces must be in the military base. Because remember, they are not an intervention force. They are not a peacekeeping force. They were sent there by the forces of the SADC region as part of that contingent. And therefore the mandate is different from the MONUSC mandate. And we know that even now in Kinshasa there are protests and those supporting government, but you have protests in other areas of the DRC, those supporting government and those supporting the rebels. And this is what we've been talking about, that DRC is actually divided in 2 parts. The government of the DRC is not in charge of the entire country, and this tragedy was bound to happen, but the international community didn't listen. But also the president of the DRC was in denial that he's not in control of strategic areas in the DRC, and this might come back to haunt him. And this is what has happened.
Absolutely. What is concerning, at least if the statement from the SANDF is, if their statement is anything to go by, I beg your pardon, is that these latest fatalities actually took place at the base itself. They say a motor bomb was sent from M23 rebels, and one of those struck the base, leading to these fatalities. It almost paints a picture of the SANDF almost being cornered and restricted to the base, which, again, if optics are anything to go by, doesn't really, inspire confidence.
Well, they have no option. If you say they must go out and fight, they have to fight side by side with some people who are supporting the government of the DRC. These people committed genocide in Rwanda. And therefore, the South African Defence Force fighting side by side with genocides. So they had to alter the operations. And this is becoming problematic because now you do this under pressure. And that is why I think they are in the base, because they don't want to be seen as the perpetrators or people who are behind fighting and fueling fighting and the loss of life of ordinary people in the DRC, because at the end of the day, even ordinary people are dying. And therefore, the strategy, the deployment becomes very problematic, and the enemy will take an advantage to send a message to the DRC forces that we can fight you, and those who are helping you are paralyzed. So that's the problem with this fight now. And remember, even the terrain there is very complex. Only people in the DRC understand this terrain in the eastern part of the DRC because they've been there. I mean, M23 rebels are Congolese, and they know this is their country. They know it better. So the South African Defence Force, the visuals you see, it was Friday when they were fighting very hard and when we saw those casualties. And for now, they are at the base. And as you pointed out, one person dying because he or she was in hospital, and the 3 now dying after that launch of that bomb. And I think this is the situation that we are dealing with right now.
A difficult situation indeed. Let's speak a bit more about what is stacked against the SANDF at the moment. You've already mentioned the fact that, you know, the terrain is difficult to ascertain, but I imagine another complexity is just the sheer capacity to be able to respond to M23 rebels. For one, we know our airspace capabilities are also relatively restricted. So even things like pulling the soldiers out might not be as easy as just that.
It is not going to be easy even to repatriate the bodies. But as I pointed out, there's a moment where you engage, where you agree. And you will have that moment where both sides will agree to ceasefire so that you can deal with those logistics. And I think very soon the Department of Defense will communicate how they are going to handle this. But it's a very sensitive matter, and therefore you don't just give more information. But I think South Africans want to know what happened, where to from here. And I think those who have their children, their mothers, their brothers, their wives, their husbands in the DRC being part of this contingent are worried, and they would like to get information. And for example, now when you are talking about the 4, the question becomes, who are those? And for members of families of those soldiers who are in the DRC, this becomes a very sad moment. While we're still waiting for the list of those who have passed on, that hasn't been made public because perhaps they are still struggling to locate families of some of those who perished.
There's questions around what the solution looks like. Is it a military solution or a diplomatic one? We know that there's been a conversation between President Cyril Ramaphosa and his Rwandan counterpart in Paul Kagame. One has to wonder what will come out of that, whether any kind of diplomatic solution can be arrived at by those two heads of state.
Well, we indicated earlier on that this is not new. South Africa brought the Congolese to South Africa 20 years ago to engage in a discussion. How do you find a lasting solution in Congo? Because it is also affecting the entire Great Lakes region and neighboring countries. Those negotiations were very protracted. A lot of money was spent, and every stakeholder was there. That's the kind of a conversation you must have. You can't have a conversation with only President Kagame and President Tshisekedi. You leave out the M23 rebels. Why do we have M23 rebels? We have to answer that question, not forgetting that they are not the only rebels in that country. You have 200 different groups, and you cannot ignore that. And therefore, the political leadership of the Great Lakes region, including the DRC, must be honest when they discuss this. That is why South Africa, again, is calling for a political solution, a diplomatic engagement. The Luanda process led by the president of Angola must resume with urgency. The same with the EAC process, because DRC is a member of the East Africa community and also the SADC. Now, President Tshisekedi, when he's not happy with the proposal from EAC, he then called the SADC to intervene. When he's not happy about SADC, it must be EAC. So that contestation of which regional organization can be better placed to facilitate the talks that will lead to the lasting solution is a problem. And therefore, I think this is where the president of South Africa, having suffered this loss, must draw the line on the sand that will push the two leaders to go and negotiate, and we reach a situation where now you are engaged in a dialogue that will lead to the lasting solution in relation to the problem in the DRC. Because you can't continuously blame others for problems of your own country. Who are the M23 rebels? Yes, they will get support from opportunistic people or country or organizations, because it's about also the minerals of that country. The second issue, you have these people who are allegedly being figured in terms of having perpetrated or being responsible for the 1994 genocide, who are in the DRC. Which country can allow another country to house the genocide? So all people in this conflict, they have to do introspection in terms of their own different contribution to this protracted war.
Absolutely. Difficult situation in the DRC. We know it's a very vast country. What's happening meanwhile in Kinshasa are protests from some people there who are obviously watching with a keen interest, but we'll certainly get another opportunity to completely ventilate what's taking place there throughout the course of the day. Sophie Mokoena is our international desk editor. For now, thanks very much indeed.